Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was at the Calgary Stampede over the weekend, where he, not surprisingly, took some shots at the Prime Minister's seeming reluctance to meet with his caucus after last month's Conservative by-election win in Toronto.
Justin Trudeau has been in panic mode. He's not here at the Stampede, is he? Nobody's seen him around. Don't feel offended, Calgary, that Justin Trudeau is hiding from you. He's actually hiding from his own caucus. Terrified to meet with the people who are supposed to be his greatest supporters.
So late last week, the Liberal caucus chair sent a note saying scheduling and logistics made the loudly demanded full caucus meeting impossible at this time. But if caucus can't meet, what does the Prime Minister need to do instead to calm concerns among his MPs? We're going to talk about that with the Power Panel. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. Vandana, hello everybody. Vandana, let's start with you. The Prime Minister's not meeting with the full caucus, but he has been doing smaller, let's call them breakout sessions. Ashley Burke talked to Tony Van Bynen, says he met with a small number of MPs in the York area of Toronto, and they say it's a more productive thing. It sounds like he's staying, and is this the right approach in your view, as opposed to the big get everyone together?
Well, absolutely, and I did reflect about this quite a bit on the weekend, but a caucus meeting, for those who don't know, caucus come speak and they share their information and they share what's happening in their ridings, and that was something that was a big part of my job the last 10 years. But it's not a good place for a back and forth dialogue. So if you want to speak to the Prime Minister, these smaller groups where people can have their say, they can hear from him, they can feel like they can really share what they're feeling and not just hear the one lines of what people are thinking, things that you've read. I think it's much better. And I've heard a lot from caucus, but they feel like positive. And I feel caucus, I've heard from caucus who were really upset post the by-election, but after speaking to him, feel really positive. And actually, I'm going to write this note for him. I'm going to share these ideas, but felt like there was a really good reception there. So I actually think what he's doing is right. And that way people can actually have proper one-on-one or few-on-one time with him, and it allows them to really hash out the conversation. So
Jordan, the people who have met with the Prime Minister seem to be okay with it. Others who wanted the big meeting they've expressed some frustration that this is centrally controlled and keeps everybody divided. And what's your view on what's happening?
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think doing meetings like that in small groups and one-on-one, it's smart for another reason, right? It keeps the unhappy people apart from each other. And when caucus gets in a large group like that, and there's the big sense of grievance, that's you can lose control of those meetings. And I think that there is definitely a risk for him if he were to call a caucus meeting now, because it's clear that there's not really a plan to change anything significant at this point. And so if he goes into a full caucus meeting without offering anything significant after the by-election, then yeah, I think that could go badly for him.
So Lisa, he's taken the smaller group approach. I don't know if there's a plan to change anything significant at this point, or if there's an intention to maybe make significant changes later in the summer. What do you think the Prime Minister and his team need to do if he's going to stick around, as he says?
Well, what a contrast between Conservatives and Liberals, though, I have to say. I mean, you can't avoid it. If the caucus wants a meeting in the Conservative Party, the caucus is going to have a meeting. And yes, it is a conversation back and forth. Leadership sits up on a dais and people go to the microphones and they tell exactly the leadership what they think of what's happening and what isn't happening. I think that's healthier, quite frankly, than allowing the MPs to be handled, which is exactly what's happening. You MPs out there, you're being handled so that you don't get together and really talk about whether or not this is something you should be worried about. And I think they should be worried about it, quite frankly, because openly discussing it may actually get you to a better result, or maybe better ideas or more innovation. I will say, though, that part of the reason why the Prime Minister probably can't go to Calgary, in all seriousness, is that one of the MPs who wrote a letter, put in writing that they want a caucus meeting, is an MP from Calgary, which makes it really awkward and difficult for the Prime Minister to go there. So he just really can't go there if there's not going to be such a meeting, because people like yourself, David, will be asking, are you going to meet with so-and-so?
Well, and this is Calgary Skyview MP George Chahal, who, by the way, has an invitation to come on this. So George Chahal, if you're listening, you know how to get in touch. Vandana, are they being handled, or is the Prime Minister just taking time to come up with whatever a planned response will be?
I don't think they're being handled. I think you just know that, having been in that room, you're going to say the same. You're going to hear the same thing over and over again. There's no solution being thought through. So if you want to think through solutions, if you actually want to think through, how do we actually show, we heard the message loud and clear from St. Paul's. How do we deliver for Canadians? A solution is a back and forth dialogue, and you can talk about a number of issues. It's not just about St. Paul's. People have a list of things they want to talk about to their leader, right? And I will say, I actually was surprised, even myself, that when I spoke to some MPs, some of them I don't want a caucus meeting. It's just going to be vitriol. It's going to be negative. It's not going to put me in a headspace. I won't get what I want to say, what I want for the PM. So I don't actually think that. I think there's a few MPs who will feel that that is one of the tools. But I think if you actually talk to most of them and they say you have a one-on-one time or a small group of people to talk to the PM, they take that option.
Well, and that's fair. And Jordan, some of the Liberals I've spoken to privately have said the same thing. We don't really need a big caucus meeting for the loudmouths to vent. And also for people who say, I'm not going to run again if he stays. There's others who say, I'm not going to run again if he goes. So there is these competing interests in there. But, if the focus is solutions, as Vandana says, what are the solutions right now?
Well, I think that there are things we've talked about on the show and many others have talked about a fair bit, but obviously changing something significant at the top. So the one of the things on the menu is, of course, the Prime Minister changing himself as leader. He seems to want to take that off the menu, but that would be, I think, the one that's most obviously potentially up for debate internally anyway. But of course, Chrystia Freeland as finance minister would be the next most significant change I think that they could be looking at in terms of shuffling somebody else into that role. And then, of course, there's a question of their position on the carbon tax. There's what they're doing with the confidence and supply agreement with the NDP. Should they be doing something different there? Those are all things that would maybe offer something a little bit more substantial. But as it stands, I think what's really remarkable is that coming out of this by-election, not even the messaging has changed. Nothing has shifted. And so to me, it's not at all surprising that people, whether they feel a caucus meeting is a vehicle or not, are still generally very unhappy.
So Lisa, what are some of the things you can do here, right? Because if the Prime Minister is not going, that seems to be very clear at this point, no intention of leaving. There's not a lot of room on policy unless you reverse yourself, because the fiscal room isn't there to go on an even more aggressive spending path on things. What do you do? What are your options at this point in the summer?
Well, the options that they've already done several times. You can think about a cabinet shuffle. You can think about, as was mentioned, firing your finance minister. That certainly makes a big splash. Bring somebody in from the outside, bring them into cabinet instead of having an elected MP sit in cabinet. Those are kind of variations on a theme of mixing up the people around you. But I still would submit that it's the person in charge is the problem, not necessarily the cabinet itself. And I guess finally, from my point of view, I think that what the Prime Minister is going to go out and do these town halls across the country, something that he's done before in the past. And that will be interesting to see. There's only so much you can curate those meetings. I assume he's not going to go to the meetings in the ridings and the people who letter asking for a caucus meeting, but certainly other places they'll end up going, and he'll go out and stand in the center and roll up his sleeves and answer the questions and be all charming, and whether or not that's going to take, I don't know.
I hadn't seen that, Vandana. Okay, because I knew Jagmeet Singh was going to do some town halls, but would that even be something the Prime Minister could do at this point? And in July, this city's just awash with cabinet shuffle rumors, right? Every July. Do you think that's something that's really in the cards?
On the shuffle? I think they'll need time to figure that out. I think the PM has, for what they're saying about him hiding, he has been in the last 2 weeks. I've seen him at Afrofest. I've seen him at Taste of Asia. I've seen him at the Ram Mandir. I've seen him at a place where Pierre Poilievre is never at, which is Pride. And, he's getting fairly good reception. I've been talking to former staff of mine who's saying, it's been pretty positive. I'm sure there's mixes of that, of course. I'm not going to be naive about that. Yeah. But I think they're going to listen, and it's not going to be, I don't think the average Canadian cares who's around the table or who's in staffing. Most Canadians don't know who the ministers are or who the chief of staff is. They'll want to know, what are you doing to deliver for Canadians? Is my dental coverage? Am I going to get pharmacare? Am I going to get, is the cost of living cheaper? I saw a 3rd-year anniversary of the CCB in BC. they're going to care about what's happening for me. I don't think they'll care about the nitty-gritty. So
But
that's what they're thinking
does the
about.
calendar give you the time to do that, or does this go back to Lisa's point that, you know, if you're not going to change the prime minister, you're not going to change your circumstances?
I think the calendar, you can do whatever you want with the calendar.
Right.
If you want something to happen, it can happen. But it's about what is the right move. Just because you have the space to make a cabinet shuffle, just because you have space to do whatever else tool you think that you need, doesn't mean that's the right move. If your goal is to really show, and you saw that at St. Paul's, how to show Canadians that this government can still deliver for you, that's what you have to focus on. I think the rest is just, it's just going to be superficial.
Jordan, I don't know if you have a quick final thought on Justin Trudeau, but I would also like to get your thoughts on what's happening with Joe Biden right now. That he had to call into Morning Joe on MSNBC today is like Joe from Delaware is on line 2 is not a common thing you see. And the letter to Democratic congressional representatives, this is a president who won last time, fighting to hold on. I mean, what are your thoughts on where that one's going?
Well, I mean, it's so unprecedented. I know we say that a lot, but this really is for a sitting president to be in this situation. And look, I mean, I don't know that he's managing necessarily to turn the tide. You've seen, since the debate, you've seen concerns coming up from former Speaker Nancy Pelosi raising questions. You've got David Axelrod out. So these are not things that are being raised by opponents. These are being raised really by close Democratic friends and allies. And I think that the convention is obviously going to be an inflection point, so that after the convention, it would be difficult to imagine anybody but Kamala Harris becoming potentially the nominee. So I think there'll be some jockeying ahead of the convention, and we may see things shift after that point. But I don't see the pressure letting up. And certainly at this stage of the game, nobody's talking about Trump. Nobody's talking about his lies, the danger that he poses to the U.S. They're all focused on Biden's competence.
Yeah, Lisa, we should say Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, a lot of people look at it, said today, I'm not stepping in if he goes. This is all a big distraction. Just we got about a minute left. What are your thoughts on where Joe Biden is right now?
New York Times opinion yesterday, really good from a psychologist professor from Wharton School in Pennsylvania. And what he said was, what you're seeing is something very common, escalation of commitment to a foregone conclusion, which means he's doubling down on everything. He's decided he's going to continue in this path, and he's going to go down this path. And it could be to the detriment of the democracy of the United States.
Vandana, last 30 seconds to you. What do you think?
I think what he's doing is a big problem for his party. Even with his language, I felt it was very selfish, that he is the best, that he thinks he's the best for Trump. And I think if your party doesn't feel that way, then you have to take a message with that. And if you really care about the party, if you care about democracy, as he says in the letter, then you got to move out and you got to put someone else in there.
Who knew a debate and a by-election would change the conversation about the two longest-serving leaders in North America so profoundly, but here we are on a July Monday with a lot of uncertainty in the air. Lisa Wright, Vandana Cotter, Jordan Likens, thank you so much for being here today.